Welcome everyone for the second time here at this event. So for those of you that were not here in the morning, my name is Agata. I'm a Chief Legal Officer of Institute of Free Technology, and within the Institute of Free Technology we have a number of projects. One of them is Logos, which is decentralized privacy, preserving full tech stack, vertically integrated. So today I wanted to talk to you about Freedom Stack. Privacy as architecture of trust, and infrastructure for legitimate self-governance. And before starting, just an acknowledgement. I'm a lawyer, and I've spent last few days here surrounded by cryptographers, engineers, community members, cypherpunks, activists, but also lawyers, educators, and thought leaders. And it's been revealing and humbling in the best way. And one thing is undeniable: privacy is not a single idea. It's a lot of ideas. It's a mathematical idea, it's emotional, ideological, architectural, political, culture, and code at the same time. So my contribution today is not new ZK construction. I would like to introduce a frame, a way of understanding privacy as structure across all those different dimensions, technical, legal, but also civic. So set of reflections from me, places where I notice the narratives shift, concepts collapse into one another, where broader architectural view of privacy could help us all to build better, but also to explain better, whether to each other, to our clients, to our potential users, but also to regulators and policymakers and so on. So let's start with the myths, okay? For years, visibility was treated as path to accountability. But we have learned that total exposure did not create integrity at all. It actually created fragility. So privacy is not secrecy. Let's be clear about that. And exposure, on the other hand, full exposure, full visibility is not accountability. Because privacy is what gives the oversight its meaning. Because when everything is visible, then nothing is trustworthy. Accountability also requires proportion, but not surveillance. So I would like us to start also using lots of different other terms when talking about privacy, and not only, privacy in a very narrow context. And let's start with structure. Non-digital governance, including our democratic systems, they always relied on boundaries, separation of power, due process, scoped authority, and so on. Now, digital systems effectively erase these boundaries and replace them with indiscriminate visibility, surveillance, network capture, censorship, and so on. Now, true accountability, and I'll be repeating myself a lot here because I think it's very important, but true accountability does not come from seeing everything. We need to be explaining that, including to our lawmakers and regulators. It comes from structure. It comes from systems designed to reveal only what is relevant. And privacy by architecture makes transparency proportional and therefore legitimate. Now, we've had years of exposure in our digital system. How is trust doing? Turns out that exposing everything did not magically fix everything, shockingly. We wanted decentralization, but we somehow built the world's most transparent public diary. So let's talk about trust. Now, cryptographic systems has been discussed a lot these few days, now allow verification without exposure. So actions can be proven without revealing identities or internal data. That also means that roles within our networks can be bounded by design. Validators should validate. Verifiers should verify. Users should transact. And each of those roles should be limited to the visibility their function and activity requires. So this way, trust can become a property of architecture, not surveillance. Many systems, both centralized and decentralized, were built without many structural limits. Everything became visible, linkable, inferable, and that kind of visibility creates pressure points. Because systems like that are very easy to manipulate, to distort, to capture, and individual actors within these systems, not only users, but participants operating these networks, other infrastructure participants, they become easy to target, like validators, for example. So we shouldn't look at privacy here as if it to add a constraint to the system, but we should rather look at privacy as restoring the boundaries that these systems were actually always meant to have. Now, in today's systems, including the blockchain, the entire life cycle of information is exposed. So intentions leak early, mempool activities, search queries, routing metadata, and so on. Actions reveal linkages, transaction graphs, behavioral patterns, flows, and then consequences accumulate into identity. So traces and logs turn neutrality of the network noise into a pattern, and then pattern into a profile, and then profile into a person. But this is not transparency. We often refer to it as such. This is not transparency. This is structural overexposure. And privacy is what can recalibrate these stages. Again, intentions can be protected. Actions can become provable, not exposed. And consequences can become proportionate. So let's look at privacy and let's start talking about it as architectural repair, not opacity, because that's how sometimes privacy is referred to, introducing opacity. Let's talk about it as architectural repair of our systems. Now, healthy systems rely on those boundaries. Who can see what can be inferred, how long information persists? Today's digital architecture removed them. Now, we should only reveal what is necessary and prove what is sufficient and expose nothing beyond the relevant function. What this is actually structural fairness. And that's another word we should use when talk about privacy. It's actual structural fairness, structural justice. Now, once boundaries return, then verification can replace surveillance. So privacy reintroduces the constraints that make the system governable. Systems that are fully exposed and visible are not governable. So visibility should be scoped to purpose, and retention of information should be aligned with the relevant function. The inference risk should be reduced by design, not by discretion of the relevant actor. And roles can be limited, also technically, not voluntarily. So again, privacy is not preference. Let's call it system-level resilience. Why? Because it protects individuals, communities, validators, builders, and eventually infrastructure itself from political, economic, and network level capture. Because privacy is actually a repair mechanism that makes decentralization meaningful again. Because decentralization without boundaries like that is just centralization waiting to happen. And we see that today. Legitimacy. Now, law itself, it's only functional when the limits are enforceable and become technical. So systems can prove the rules were followed, but they don't need to reveal the underlying data. And let's talk about privacy by design as enforcement layer of proportion. So this would transform the transparency from an instrument of control it is today into a foundation of legitimacy, legitimate governable networks. Let's talk about resilience. Now, privacy and safety, they are being framed often as opposites, right? If something is to be safe, we need to see it, we need to trace it. Now, unrestricted visibility, that just increases the systemic risk and concentrates power. So what privacy does, it distributes trust within the network. It reduces capture, and it's eventually
strengthening system resilience. Again, it protects not only individual, but our infrastructures from those that operate on it, but also maintain it. Okay. Now, this week, these few days made it very clear to me that privacy is not one conversation. It's multiple conversations and multiple dimensions: technical, civil, legal, social, and each of those dimensions have different concerns and different questions. So some privacy dimensions relate to compliance obligations. This matters, but this is not the whole picture, because there is another dimension, which is structural, okay, where architecture is designed to determine who sees what can be inferred, where power accumulates in the network, what makes network resilient, and so on. There's another dimension, which is civic. So privacy enables creation of public goods. Let's think of shared trust, shared neutrality, shared safety, shared resilience that privacy enables as a public good, and the ability for communities to cooperate without coercion. Because if we collapse all these different dimensions in conversations and debates, then the privacy always gets dragged into this very narrow compliance reflex, as if privacy was only about reporting, about paperwork, and about regulatory obligations. It's understandable, this is important, but this kind of collapse of dimensions and conversations obscures this structural dimension of privacy, that dimension that protects neutrality, that reduces pressure points, and that keeps the systems resilient. The recent Bueno Brothers case, which is MEV case in the US, some of you might be familiar with it, prosecution of Bueno Brothers. That was not about obligations or privacy, but what it exposed is structural fragility. Structural fragility in this case of validator role, because when internal actors of the infrastructure are both too visible themselves and also see too much, then that is an opportunity for abuse. And that these actors also become leverage points. And the neutrality of the network becomes negotiable. And the power flows off the chain, and we don't have control of that anymore. So neutrality that privacy enables is a civic good, okay? And that is also privacy, just a different dimension. So let's understand this dimension to avoid collapsing all the debates about privacy into regulatory anxieties. And both matter, but not in the same way. So when you think of privacy, think of these words. Not as opposites, but as what privacy enables. So privacy being the frame for all these things. Privacy is something that turns values into variable systems, that turns trust into code, that turns fairness into process, that turns freedom into structure. So privacy does not hide systems, it gives them form. Because when limits are encoded, then the oversight doesn't require intrusion. The coordination does not require control. The system can remain accountable and without resorting to surveillance. So architecture can become governance, which is proportionate, lawful, and defensible. Because freedom is not the absence of rules. It's the presence of boundaries that protect choice. And privacy gives freedom its structure. Without it, the trust collapses. But with it, communities can act without coercion, without profiling. And privacy, again, I will repeat that again, that it's not only protecting individuals, it's protecting the infrastructure itself. It's protecting communities, allowing them to coordinate on their own terms. So we optimized for control, our networks. So how is freedom performing, right? This is the architecture of trust. There's like a feedback loop between privacy, law, and freedom.
And the real choice is really not privacy versus progress or privacy versus safety. This is surveillance versus structure. And one of them builds the systems that deserve our long-term confidence and that communities can build on freely. So just to wrap it up, I think my time is up. Privacy is not what hides systems. It's what makes them governable. Boundaries preserve neutrality. Verification replaces assumptions. Structure prevents pressure. So privacy produces public goods, which is trust, neutrality, coordination, and eventually durable freedom. And privacy strengthens the freedom, and not as ideology, but the ability for communities and infrastructure to cooperate without coercion. So this is not just privacy narrative, it's governance narrative, it's resilience narrative, it's security narrative, it's freedom narrative. This is all privacy. So I want to repeat this slide so that you remember the words that you should think of when thinking about privacy, when building privacy solutions, but also when explaining privacy to others, because this is something we can defend. Thank you very much for your attention.